story today began on the 14th of May in 2002. It was exactly 4:50 in the afternoon, and I was working in Shanghai. I was there with two of my colleagues. We were working with a client. The day was about to end. One of my colleagues came up to me with a phone in her hand, which seemed odd. She said, "Alison, your family's trying to reach you." Immediately my heart went here, because you always knew that's not a good thing. I went outside and I held the phone tightly to my ear to hear my husband's voice. He said to me the thing that I hope you'll never hear. He said, "Alison, your mom and dad have been in a car accident, and neither has survived." That turned my life upside down. The next 36 hours I can hardly remember. I flew from Shanghai back to Singapore. I went to the United States where I met my siblings, and I was there for 3 weeks with them before I came back home to Singapore. When I came back to Singapore, I was so jet-lagged, as you are, and every morning I'd wake up when it was still dark, and I'd crawl out of bed, and I'd go for a walk. I called those my morning walks because all I could do was grieve. Fortunately, it was dark, and people passing me couldn't see me cry. I cried every morning, but I started walking further. My walks, they became jogs. My jogs became trots, and then the trotting became running. And I continued to run until December of that year. Now, when December came, I had a whole new wave of sadness happen because Christmas Day was my birthday and it was my dad's birthday. And so growing up was always so special because we could always celebrate that day together. And I knew that day we would never be able to spend again celebrating our birthdays. So I'm really not a crybaby, even though I had been crying ever since May. And I said, that's it. I got to do something that's going to give me some hope. I got to do something that's going to make me work for the future. So I thought really long and hard, what would that be? And I thought, I'll run a marathon, as you do. And so I did. For the next year, I ran and I trained and I sweat. And I ran up till December when many of you may have participated in a stand chart marathon. We're in Singapore, of course, so December marathon isn't cool by any stretch of the imagination, and I can still remember that day. It was so hot, I was sweating before I even started it, and we had a start-off time at 4 in the morning. I dragged myself through the 42 kilometers of that race, and I got to the end, and I cried. But this time, it was the worst. Because it wasn't tears of joy, but realizing that all my running was never going to bring my mom and dad back. So over the last 15 years, I've become an endurance athlete. I realized that when I came to the end of the marathon, I came to the realization that I didn't need to run anymore to heal my broken heart. I just loved to run, and I wanted to keep running. So for the last 15 years, that's what I've done. I became an endurance athlete. I've had a great time. I've run, swum, you can say swum, I think, and ridden a bike thousands of kilometers. And I've trained for and competed in a 100-kilometer race. I've done a couple of half Ironman, a bunch of marathons, half marathons. I've just loved it, and I've learned so much from that experience. I've learned so much about what is my maximum capacity and what are the capabilities that I need to develop for a race. I've learned a lot about the importance of pace and about recovery. But most of all, I've learned an important thing, which is that if I want to improve my endurance capacity, I have to push myself to go as fast and far as I can, but no more, until I have the capacity to sustain it. And that idea is so important. That's what I call intelligent restraint. Now, I think it's so important. I'm going to see if I can work the technology and show you. Those were the pictures of me doing those sports. Here's the definition. So intelligent restraint is a growth philosophy. It's one that says that we want to go as fast and far as we can, but no more until we have the capacity to do so. Now, fortunately for my family, I am not a professional athlete, because if I were, it would not help us put food on the table. What I've been doing, I actually have had a day job for the last 25 years working with companies to help them solve the people and organization challenges of growth. And what I see is that many of us, and I say us because I also lead an organization, we don't find the right pace. We don't quite get it right. And when we experience that, there's a range of things that we experience. One of them is that we might see a stall in growth, or we might see waves of what I call boom splat cycles of growth. Then we might see a flurry of activities, because when we're on the upside, I always say growth ignores a multitude of sins. So then when we're on the downside, suddenly we're busy cutting costs, or we're running to initiate, roll out initiatives to stimulate sales, or we're poorly executing, we're inconsistently executing. Sometimes with all those things, we see employees that are disengaged and burned out. Now, I want to make this more practical for you, and I just want to ask, please, could everybody just show me your smartphone? Does everybody have one today? I'm not disappointed. Now, I'm, of course, feeling a little bit exposed here because I'm the only one that doesn't have a smartphone with me. So you can take your pictures now. How many of you have a Samsung? Some of you. Let me talk a little bit about the Samsung. Now, I got to tell you, when the Galaxy 7 was coming out, now I'm pretty faithful to my smartphone, and I like it an awful lot, but I was tempted because it was a good-looking phone. It was nice looking, and it was packed with features. And the price was right. Samsung had worked very hard as a company. It had become very fast and very progressive and quite innovative in its space. And when it released the Galaxy 7, it did sort of a classic Speedy thing as it looked over its shoulder at Apple in a race out. It went too fast. And early on, they knew there was a problem, but they were so fast, they were so unwilling to stop and to think and learn what was going on, that they failed to understand that they'd created a phone that they didn't take into account the requirements of the battery to not catch on fire. Going too fast cost them billions of dollars. It cost a withdrawal of a product and huge costs associated with the brand. And Samsung's not alone. But let's explore another organization, one I love. I grew up, Kodak was the king of photography. Kodak was this great company. We all knew what a Kodak moment was. Does anybody else remember a Kodak moment? Yeah. Okay, this is my age group here. I'm liking it. Kodak was amazingly innovative. You know, they developed the digital camera in 1975, but they put it aside because they thought it would threaten their film business. They weren't willing to take that step, even when they saw the market changing. Even when they saw that photography was changing, they were unwilling to do what they thought would threaten their core business. Kodak was encumbered, it was constrained by its success. It had been so successful that it was unwilling to push hard enough and fast enough, and it became irrelevant. Eventually, it declared bankruptcy. It sold off most of its assets. I am happy to say it is coming back in a smaller form. It's very focused, but that'll be another story. Now, it turns out that in endurance training, we have a lot of really lovely rules of restraint that can help us. And I've always found them to be particularly helpful. What I find, and I'll give you an example. For instance, let's say you're running, you don't want to increase your mileage more than 10% in a week. Or you don't want to increase maybe the length of a long run. Or maybe before a longer distance, like a marathon, you start to taper. So there's these really nice, easy rules of thumb that help guide the ramping up and the ramping down of the volume of your training. I love those rules. They're so simple to apply. But we don't really have those rules of restraint in business. Now, don't get me wrong, business is full of rules of restraint, right? There are things like don't divulge confidential information, don't give anyone your password, don't give information in a negotiation, don't have an inappropriate relationship with your subordinates. They keep us from doing bad things, which is a good thing. But they don't show us how to grow. They don't show us how we can push our capacity for growth and at the same time perform as a business. So I want to share with you 3 rules of intelligent restraint that I think are fabulous and easy to apply. And my hope for you is that tomorrow you'll start thinking about, well, how can I put these to work for myself? Now, there's 3. The first is focus overrules vision. The second, routines beat strengths. And the third is exert, then recover. And what I'd like to do is spend the rest of my time with you talking through those 3 rules. So let me focus on the first one, focus overrules vision. Now, before I moved to I lived in Dallas, Texas, and in December, sometime in the 90s, I can remember going to see the Dallas Marathon. And James and I, my husband, he and I went to see it with our friends, and Harry and I stood at the end, at the finish line. Meanwhile, James and Christine sat inside a nice warm cafe nearby and ate pancakes. Well, Harry and I were so excited at the end, watching and cheering people on, men and women and young people and old people and fat people and skinny people. Everyone was crossing the finish line, and we were so excited. At one point, an athlete with one leg and with crutches crossed the finish line. We were so inspired. Harry and I looked at each other so excited because we saw it, that man inspired us. We looked at each other, and with complete earnestness, we shook hands and said, we're going to run a marathon. Well, the years went by and the vision faded, as did the passion. Life intervened, and it never brought us to the marathon. What brought me to the marathon eventually wasn't that vision, it was focus. Now, my first marathon, I had the holy focus of hope. I mean, who wouldn't? But after that, actually, what drove me, the focus, was actually a lot simpler. I simply knew what the next race would be. Once I knew what the next race would be, I could have goals for that race and say, well, what is it actually that I want to do? And then I'd say, now, what's it going to take to succeed? Those 3 things helped me get focus. Once I had focus, I could line up my life. I could allocate time and resources. Since I'm a busy person, I got a family, I work, I do all this stuff on the side. I'd have to say no to certain things, and I have to line up resources that would allow me to allocate the time to train, because you can't really cheat races like that. You can cheat a half marathon, you can't cheat 100K. And so you really have to change things. You have to create routines. So once I had the focus, I was able to create a discipline that allowed me to finish. What I see often in the work that we do in organizations is sometimes there's a fuzzy vision, and sometimes there's a bit of a vision of growth, which usually translates to something like, we're going to double our sales in 3 years, or we want X% improvement in EBITDA over the next 3 years. So that often we just have a numerical target. What I see is that so many leaders understand the race they're in today, but they don't know what that next race will be. If we don't know that next race, we can't know what success looks like when we achieve it, and we can't decide what it takes to win. The leaders who really get it right, that's what they do. They create incredible focus, not only focus for themselves, but focus with others in the organization. They build a critical mass that understands that, and then they work very hard to line up the resources needed in order to win. I will say that in the work that we do with growth leaders, we sometimes find that they're not very popular because sometimes it's easy to say yes, it's hard to say no. It's easy to take resources, it's hard to give them up. So it's very challenging for growth leaders to not only create focus, but also to create real alignment that means that we allocate resources to what really matters. So I leave you with a thought that while vision can get you to the race, it's actually focus that gets you across the finish line. Now, second rule is routines beat strengths. Now, when I first started running, I fell in love with it. I think it was because I read this great book. It was called Running the Spiritual Path, and it basically taught me about how to do running meditation. And I would go out. Nothing made me happier than to go out at about 6 in the morning and run on trails all day. This didn't make my family very happy, by the way. But to be breathing and meditating and running, I just absolutely loved it. Now, I was pretty slow, but that didn't bother me because I knew in my heart that this was my strength. In fact, I even read books that ridiculed people like me, and they called it LSD, long, slow distance. And I said, that doesn't matter. I'm a donkey. That's what I'd say. Not an ass, a donkey. And so it served me well. I could run very far and very slowly. But one day, at the end of a 40K run, I was coming back. I was in the jungle, and it was in a very narrow trail, and there was a very large male monkey sitting in front of me. Now, I was a little smelly at this point because I'd been running for a really long time with a camel pack that had lots of food in it, and I must have smelled like Ode to Banana. And as I came up to that monkey, he shrieked and he came towards me, and I shrieked and I ran in the other direction. I took off like a gazelle. As I sprinted, I felt the dagger of his teeth into the back of my calf. I screeched. I looked back. There was no monkey. In my haste to escape, in my sprint of a gazelle, I tore my calf. I learned a very important lesson. That you can't run like a gazelle when you've trained like a donkey. I thought I had this strength that turned out not to be a strength. And what I learned is that my strength it limited me. But we're the same way. Think of how many organizations we limit ourselves from changing because we want to rely on who we are and what's made us successful. When I changed tack, I recovered from my torn calf. I decided I wanted a new challenge. I would do triathlons. That was much easier on my body. And so I decided to do a half Ironman. So since I didn't know what to do, I hired a sports coach, which I'm very thankful I did. And I worked with a man named Scott Molina, who himself is an Ironman athlete and a coach. And he worked with me. And I learned something that was profound. And it was that if I wanted to improve the capacity of my body to go further and faster, what I needed to do was implement progressively challenging routines. Our bodies are kind of smart. Like any system, if we don't push them, they kind of stay the same. In fact, even going out and having a really tough workout doesn't make any difference. It just kind of keeps coming back. It's one of the reasons why you should never restrict your calories too much, because your body doesn't just lose weight. It says, oh no, you're starving, and it suddenly becomes very efficient. So our bodies are very smart. What I learned from these progressively challenging routines was that it was the routine and the ongoing challenge that sparked the development of my capacity. I think this is really important. There's an awful lot of people in this room that are in fields of human development. And we've known for 2 decades that experience is a great teacher. And we know that challenge and experience develops. But I want you to go away and think about that. It's not just challenge. It's progressively challenging routines. That changes systems. That's what changes us. It's not just a random challenge. Now, I want to give you an example of an organization that I think did a great job with introducing a routine, just to make this kind of practical. This is a company, I'll call it ArtCo. It's a marketplace or platform for art and designed products for homes. And ArtCo has been very successful, and it was growing so fast that, when you're a very high growth environment, it's very challenging because you start your job and suddenly it's changing, right? So you have to be changing very fast. And the volume of work is constantly changing. There's a lot of newness, a lot of challenge. And one of the things that ArtCo decided that they wanted to do was to find a way to help themselves scale. So they introduced a routine they called Scaling Day. And as it sounds, Scaling Day happened once a month. And it started they'd pick a little problem. They would pick processes or work activities that they knew needed to scale in order to sustain growth. And they have this fabulous office, and in the middle they have a glass room. Many of us have been involved in activities of documenting processes, and usually we kind of sit around and we have Word documents and Google documents, and we're documenting lots of details, and no one cares about what we write, and no one ever looks at it. But what ArtCo did was they made it part of their culture. Scaling Day was something that people wanted to be a part of because they knew it was part of the future. And so people volunteered, they gave their time, they used it to be able to scale for growth. Now, in my book, Pacing for Growth, which I'm so excited for you all to read, you'll find a lot of examples of routines that you can use and implement to build organization, team, leader capabilities that you need for the future. The beauty of a routine is that the right routine helps you build the capabilities that you need for the future, and it also helps you conserve energy. Okay? Now, let me talk about the last one. Exert and then recover. So it's a little bit different. I have to start with sort of my own reflection of a very important recovery moment. So in that first half Ironman that I did, that was the hardest race I'd ever done. It took me over 7 hours. And I came back. I was so tired. I remember my husband and girls, they kind of scraped me off the floor, and they put me in the car, and they took me home. James, in the most loving way, had filled a bathtub full of ice. This is the man after my own heart, which is what I would do after a really long run because it would lower my body temperature and reduce inflammation. My daughters were so sweet. They created a little spa for me. And I believe that they were giving me massages, but I fell asleep so quickly I don't even remember what happened. I woke up, consumed massive amounts of carbohydrates, fell asleep, and felt much better the next day. Now that's recovery. Actually, that's called passive recovery, because passive recovery is when we rest and we recharge our battery, and we all need that, right? I think that's why a lot of us are happy that Friday's tomorrow. So passive recovery is really important. It allows us to recharge. But there's another kind of recovery that's equally important, and that's called active recovery. And, at work, we tend to think, well, I'm working or I'm not working. And with active recovery, what we'll do is we have a recovery workout, or we go slower. Heart rate is slower. It's easier on our body. And it not only helps us recover, but it helps condition, and it helps teach our body how to exert. And that's an important aspect of the relationship between exertion and recovery. It's kind of funny. It's not the exertion that helps us improve. It's actually the recovery, which I always find so interesting. I remember, I think Troy told me a story. Troy will be on our panel. He said that when the players are playing the game, it's too late to coach. And so one of the things that we have to do is to learn how to exert with the right level of exertion, and then to properly recover, because those two go hand in hand. One of the things about exertion is that often we just mindlessly exert. We're like kind of hamsters in a cage, and we're addicted to action. We're just doing, and we're not thinking about what's the purpose of my exertion. In training, we'll have really high levels where we're going all out, just pushing up the capacity of our heart. Sometimes we do race pace, and race pace is helpful. It helps us know what it feels like when we're going to be in the race. There's other times where it's just a little bit lower, where we're really pushing our aerobic capacity and we're building our strength, and then we have our recovery workouts. So part of what we have to do as leaders is learn to exert on what matters and at the right level. And we need to learn to balance the right kind of recovery with that. What I see with the leaders that I work with, that they're leaders of growth face this constant pressure because on one hand, we want to build capabilities for the future. At the same time, we have to execute today's business. And if we can't execute today's business, if we can't perform, there will be no future. Right? So really, we have to do both. We have to perform today, and we have to transform for the future. And we have to learn how to do these things without killing people. So this rule of thumb is a way of us thinking about how do we exert mindfully on what most matters? How do we create routines that allow us to do that? How do we allow ourselves to recover in the right way that both teaches us how to exert as well as to recover? Now, what I'd like to do is wrap up, and I'd like to say thank you to Google, because you all have a fabulous facility here, and it's so cool. You know, one of the things that my team really appreciated working here was just to see how Google not only created this world-class, dynamic, and collaborative workspace, but also spent energy teaching their employees how to manage their own energy using the workplace. And so I think you're really a role model of that. And I want to encourage all of you to think about that, about how do you help people manage their own energy. I want to thank all of you for being here and listening to my story and participating. We're only halfway done. We're going to do a TV talk show inspired by Graham Norton soon. I hope that I managed to get you excited and curious about intelligent restraint. I hope that you'll leave here today thinking about how you can apply these principles or these rules of intelligent restraint and become endurance athletes for business growth. Thank you. Now, what I'd like to do is, in the moments that Daryl is going to come up onto the stage, I want you to look to your left and to your right, and I want you to introduce yourself to the person sitting next to you. There's no strangers here. And when Daryl comes up, then we'll begin. It's my pleasure to introduce Daryl Dickens, the host of our fabulous show. Daryl?
I mic'd up. So, it's amazing when you know somebody for 20 years and then you learn something completely new. That's just really inspirational. Fantastic. And now, ladies and gentlemen, comes the next part of the evening, and we have an outstanding panel. Absolutely outstanding. I'm going to start to bring them up, and I want lots of energy, lots and lots of energy as they come up. Now, the first person is literally a rock star. Not figuratively. He actually plays in a rock and roll band. He's CEO of Yuyan Sang. Come on up, Richard. Yeah. All right, look at that. Now, the next person is former Olympic coach who has recently moved to Singapore and has a fascinating role here now as head of coach development for Sports Singapore, Mr. Troy Ingle. Sprint on up. Thanks, Coach. Now, next, we have somebody who I just met last week. And I have to say, this person has one of the sunniest dispositions that I've ever encountered. Elizabeth, better known as Lizzie Hamrun, who is VP and head of HR. Come on up. Bring some of that glow to the panel. Fantastic, fantastic. Now, last but not least, somebody who is head of an incredible high-growth part of the Google business, head of YouTube, which I probably watch 20 minutes a day, and less cat videos, actually, which is quite encouraging. A little more content now. I'm going to introduce Ajay Vidrasegar. Come on up. Let's make some more content. Because we just don't have enough content, right? Let's film this and make some more content. All right. Now, look at that. We're all lined up. We're all ready. I'm excited. I feel poised like a cone for a fantastic panel. Now, I was thinking, how should we kick things off? And I just think that it's a very natural segue from the author to actually the CEO of a very significant company that you have built. And I think people want to hear, how do you drink your own, not Merlot, actually, you like to drink Sauvignon Blanc. So how do you drink your own Sauvignon Blanc? And when have you found that at the company, you're running the wrong race, that you had to change the pace, slower, faster? How did you know? What did you do?
So I'll answer the first one because I do prefer Sauvignon Blanc over Merlot. It will be served later. We're a relatively small firm. We have about 50 people. And one of the things that we do, because what part of Pacing for Growth is about how do you drive execution of the day-to-day business as well as build capabilities for the future. And one of the things that we do is we look at work that we have to do that's particularly challenging, that we can create and that we can structure so that it's a learning experience for our team. And then we use a structured process to help them accelerate their development as they're also delivering work. So that would be an example of what we do.
So
I was going to tell a story about where I've seen really poor intelligent restraint. Because we were talking about this earlier. I used to work, I feel like it's a confession, I used to work in investment banking. I'm very sorry, you can love me. And and I worked for a company where, pre the crash, where exertion became a byword for being employable. And there was this confluence of always-on technology, the explosion in capital markets and global markets, and this really, really alpha culture. And I kid you not, the group HR director took a conference call in the middle of the London Marathon, right? As a sign of commitment, right? And you had this amazing situation where league tables were going around about who stayed in the office the latest, as a good thing, by the way, right? As a good thing, answering the call at 3 a.m. And what we found by doing some research was that we used to use these algorithms that checked for insider dealing. I can tell you some more over a glass of wine. But the behaviour patterns that people exhibited when they were getting ready to do insider dealing were the same behaviour patterns that people displayed when they were behaving unethically. And then because we had all these league tables about who was working, we had all the technology to read who was working, we did an overlay. Guess who were the people who were displaying the worst ethical behaviours? It's the people who were tired. So the people who'd been overworking. And we found, this blew my mind and it'll blow yours, tired people make worse ethical decisions than drunk people. Now go figure, right? And then you look at this always-on alpha culture and how many companies now don't own any assets. They just own their reputation and their brand. And then you look at how many organizations have suffered ethical crises, right? Enron, WorldCom, Anderson, the list goes on, right? And so exert and then recover, I think, is a massive gap, actually, in the way that people work today and has had really dire consequences. So it's something that I think we should really actually watch out for. And I've just seen the worst examples of that ever, really.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because you're talking a little bit about the business cycles and sort of the additional pressures. So Richard, you have such an amazing set of retail outlets. You have sourcing. You have a very significant, complex organization. You're expanding to the north, and you've seen some different business cycles. And so I'd be fascinated to hear, whether it was a growth cycle that you really wanted to ride out and really scale, or whether it was a downturn. What examples have you seen where you've had to really change the pace of the company to kind of weather it?
The problem is we can never see what's happening outside, and we know what's going on within the organization, but external factors can throw everything off, right? So, in 1997, end of 96, we just completed one buyout, and we were preparing to, continue expansion. And what happens is Asian financial crisis. And there we were in a meeting. I was in a meeting in KL. I remember this internal management meeting. We were talking how to expand everything else with our financial partners. And then the message comes in, overnight interest rates have hit, I don't know whatever percent it was, tens of percent, And we have a lot of debt, so you wonder what the hell's going to go on next. So your plans, no matter how good they are subject to these kind of outside influences, and you have to modify all the time. So
I heard this great quote once. It said that we always overestimate the impact of what we've been, the 10-year trends, and then we underestimate what happens next month.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I think that one of the concepts of intelligent restraint is around building two important growth capabilities. One is of outside-in thinking, and the other is around customer-aligned innovation. And those are really muscles that we have to exercise more and more, because you're exactly right. You could not have known, but you could be very fast and responsive. So that it's about understanding that there's these little unknowns. You have to be very adaptable, and then there's other unknowns, but we kind of know they're happening, but then we're not being proactive enough to develop.
Yeah. So in terms of growth, you have to pace yourself. But actually, what happened was every time there was a crisis, we tried to expand, because that was actually the best time. Because we're retailers, and when there's a recession or whatever, rental prices go down. So actually, that's the best time to pick up leases and so on. But and we grew a lot that way through the financial crisis, SARS, and all this sort of thing. But the other thing is about this routine. So actually, it's a lot about training and getting the team ready, so that you have to, when we open branches, there are people who can just go in and operate straight away. You don't try to open a branch and then hire people. You actually got to hire people first.
That's very interesting. So it goes back to the comment that Troy made around, once you're on the field, you can't really expect to have any more coaching. You've really got to be able to adapt real time and run whatever plays you have to now do. So when we think about the fascinating analogy around and learnings from the endurance training, what else should we think about and take away, Troy, in terms of building high performance teams, breaking barriers, but doing it with the right kind of intelligent restraint? What have you seen in terms of the actual sporting side?
I think, as I told Alison in my first conversation with her, the kind of things that we talked about, and then when I read the book, this book literally could be a book about distance running or endurance running, and that's my background. It's all about not just the rules of endurance training that Alison mentioned, like there are certain percentages of growth. They're really more principles of training that are based on physiological response that, as I read this, I realized are adaptable to the physiology of an organism too. Things like we talk about the principle of specificity of training. You have to understand what the specific demands of the athletic performance are, and you train for those. You focus on the 97% rather than the 3% peak. We talk about the principles of load and recovery because the adaptation actually happens in that time away from the exertion when the body reflects and adapts. The principles of progressive overload. You constantly stress the system because from a coaching standpoint, all the advances happen at the margin. They don't happen through undertraining, and they absolutely don't happen through overtraining. And in the endurance world, as Alison and I have talked about, there are 3 or 4 different critical margins. There's submaximal margins. There's margins that we talk about called the anaerobic threshold, which is that level that you can basically maintain for an extended period of time without accumulating fatigue. That's a really critical threshold. It's highly trainable. You go beyond that, you stress the system where there's a risk of breakdown. And then there are super maximal thresholds, which you probably need at times to bump to, so you can expect that pace. You can train for those changes in the market, changes in the pace, but you know you can't sustain them for long, so you throttle back down and regroup. So I'm reading this going, geez, this book is, number one, it makes me feel kind of smart because I see my track coaching could actually probably be more than just with what we do, but it works for everybody. It's not principles that are only applied at the Olympic level. They're also with their responses throughout all of endurance training. So.
One thing I was going to add that, often organizations really struggle to think about what is their maximum capacity. We understand today, but we don't. It's hard to imagine how are we going to be changed tomorrow. And one of the stories I told in the book that I loved was about how all the experts used to say the 4-minute mile cannot be broken. Right? It was just not going to happen. And it took us a young doctor in the UK, trained for 3 months and then broke it. Right? And then the record's been broken 17 times since. And so I think we see that in sport, that we often have that idea about, well, what's the best I can be? But then in fact, it's not true.
There have been, Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile and they said it could never be broken. There have now been over 400 people at the time. So we just, we recalibrate, right? And to your earlier point about ethical decisions, I think clearly within our world, ethics is a huge issue in sport. Drugs in sport are a major problem. But the thing that most people don't realize is that the most common drugs, they don't make you faster. What they allow you to do is work more. They reinforce that thought that more is always better. But the reality is it's not no pain, no gain. It's no brain, lots of pain or something. You really have to kind of figure out what the capacity is, and it's there for a reason.
But on maximum capacity, when I think about a business, I think about YouTube and phenomenal growth. It's hyper growth. So when you talk about maximal capacity, how do you actually look at removing constraints just to continue that maximal capacity to take up the opportunity?
Yeah, actually, I think I want to share something that really kind of shook me up when I joined Google about 7 years back. I had this very flourishing career in television, and I said, this is a place that operates a lot like mass media television. And within a few months after I came to YouTube, which was a rocket ship, it was doing really well, there was something that happened that really kind of made me very, very nervous about what we were doing. We were at that time around 85% of our consumption happened from desktops, and about 15% of our consumption happened from mobile devices. So I vividly remember this day when we were all called in for a leadership meeting in California. And we were told, long story short, that any content that comes into this platform that does not make itself available on a mobile device will not be entertained on YouTube. And a lot of us sat there saying, these guys should be nuts. We have such an extraordinary amount of volume on desktops.
We're doing so well already. Why change?
And I was sitting there saying, man, I gave up an amazing career. And what have I got into?
Yeah.
So, every day now when I think about it, it was a lot of what you talk about in this book. It is really about prioritizing and focusing and having a very vivid vision of what the world is going to be, and not really kind of restrain yourself basis the local data that you're operating within, right? Today, in many markets, we have almost the flip of what we were at 7 years back. We have 6 to 7 out of 10 minutes being consumed on connected smartphone devices. And pretty much every large video platform in the world today struggles with a situation where consumers don't get a consistent experience on all devices, which is fundamentally what we engineered at that time. And I think it's a great example of actually having a pretty clear vision of what you want to be and focusing on just that one thing and sacrificing an entire bunch of things that may look very painful then, but you're going to have an entire generation of people thanking you.
It's also a great example of how constraints, actually deliberately constraining certain things, helps create clarity.
You're having a fantastic panel here. I just want to pause to see, are there any questions? I was talking to some folks said they have some doozy questions for us. Any questions from the audience? It's a great
Or shouts of joy, comments.
Yeah, exactly. No takers. Okay. All right. So when I think about the book, it's the three big things we should remember to take away. This shows that I was paying attention, Alison, right? But I get asked the panel. You all have very different mandates in terms of what you're working on, right? But if we think about that, focus overrules vision, and that routines beat strengths, okay? And that you exert, but you must recover. I'm not saying, you don't want to do all three, but given the circumstances that you face with your very, very different businesses, which one would you prioritize right now and why?
I'll have a go at that one. Years ago, I never thought I'd give this answer, which is I think routines beat strengths. Because I spent 10 years in an alpha business and being taught that, you really just, all you need to focus on is strengths. And if you find somebody who's working for Google or Apple, you ask them one question in the interview, which is when can you start? And you just, you focus on your superstars and your top 10%, and you ignore the ecosystem. And I just think that's just absolutely bullshit. And I've learned, no offense to the talent at Google, obviously, but I'm in the wrong room. The ecosystem that the majority of your people experience every day is the thing to go after. It's not the hypo 10%. It's not simply the new product generation. It's what's the majority experience that everyone's leaning into and experiencing every day, because that's what touches your customer. And you can't get to every individual employee, but you can architect the environment that they're in. And so routines beat strengths is definitely one for us. And Alison is working with us on this super cool piece of work at the moment where we are crowdsourcing from our frontline employees to author our new culture. Because we want to put more speed and energy into our organization. Like, we're an amazing organization with a huge, deep sense of purpose. But we say things like, if you could, go and change the world and just get through these 10 committees first. That would be wonderful. If you could get consensus around that human organ you're growing, that would be amazing. Like, what? Like, how does that square? And so Alison's helping us unleash the energy in the organization by creating new routines for everybody to get to that majority experience. And that's what I've learned. It's been a big learning for me over the last few years.
It's amazing. I have spent, I don't know, but everybody must be in the same situation. I have spent work weeks doing know your strengths, the management offsite, and then, oh, you're a yellow, oh, you're a green, oh, wait, well, you work very, I go on and on. And then I read the book and I go well, You know, like it's the routine that you sort of like are really clear about that's going to get you there. I found that one a big one as well, because I was just thinking, all that stuff I went through. Like,
well, I think one of my favorite chapters was The Scale to Grow, which was really about how do you have an abundance mindset. And I think when you have an abundance mindset, you don't say, oh, it's just one or two people that are the chosen ones. You say, well, actually, if we're going to execute today's business and make it better, and we're going to build capabilities for the future, we need a lot of people on that journey. And those people have to be growing faster. And it can't just be this slow, oh, let's go send them all to this really expensive program. It's got to be anytime, anywhere, anyhow. And I think that's a mindset that we have to shift, that we can develop people better, faster, and cheaper when we change the way we think about how we develop them.
Other comments, team, in terms of the three rules? Which one you?
Yeah, I think if you're building the organization and getting everybody into doing the right thing, then routines is the most important. I think at the leadership level, I think you have to think about focus as well, but I'm not going to, frankly, a shop assistant isn't going to think too much about, what's the focus for the group today, but at the leadership level, you've got to do that. But on the other hand, routine is something that everybody in the organization can do.
I totally agree with you. And I think about that in my own business. It's so easy for us to know what today's race is. What are the capabilities for the next one? That's really much harder.
I'll take a different one from a coaching perspective. I think that focus trumps vision. And from a coaching perspective, particularly when you've identified what your current capacity is. We have an old coaching expression that hope really isn't a strategy. And so I think, our motto is design the plan, work the plan, and trust the plan. And I think if you start with a sense of what your current capacity is, and it's based on where you need to be, and in our case, in endurance training, it may be scientific based, you've got your focus. It's very focused. You don't get distracted off of what else. You know your current fitness, your desired fitness, you're going to figure out the plan to get there. And there's a great coach, obviously I'm an American, who orchestrated an amazing, at this point in time, I'm taking no sympathy.
Well, at least you're here, and not there.
But anyway, we came off a great American sporting event. 110 million people watched the Super Bowl, greatest comeback in history, and it was orchestrated by one of the greatest sports coach ever, a guy named Bill Belichick. And his motto with his team is, do your job. Do your job. And somebody asked what the halftime speech was that resulted in a 25-point turnaround, and the speech was, do your job. You all know where we are. You know what you got to do. Do your job. So I think...
Brady going to get the sixth ring?
I don't know. His wife tells him he should retire, so I don't know.
While you're on top.
I had this one story in the book about a leader who's running a very high growth organization. And one of my favorite quotes from him was, I said, what's your secret? And he says, I do my job and I let my people do theirs.
Ajay, you want to choose one that right now fits what the mandate is? You too.
I'll kind of echo what I said earlier, which is really around having a very well-defined focus and having an entire battery of people buy into that vision. And, doing that is not easy. At any point of time and in any market, you have so many opportunities and so many problems. And to try and then bottle all of it up into one overarching theme and then getting people to run the same race in the same direction in the same pace is tough to do. But when you pull it off and when it starts humming, it's a joy to be part of it.
Alison, can I just tell you, you caused marital disharmony in my home because my husband, I gave him the book because I thought it was brilliant, and he also is a long-distance runner, right? And I was saying, it's really great, and you can apply it and everything, and he said, great, and he came running in about an hour later and said, see, I've been telling you this for years. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? He said, when I'm lying there and you say, what are you doing? And I say, nothing, and you say, well, you look like you need some jobs to do. I'm recovering after exerting, Nothing is a thing. Like, I am recovering, yeah. So you owe me a glass of wine.
He should have been on the panel today.
It's 90% recovery and 10% exertion, right?
I think somebody mentioned wine, didn't they? Did they mention wine? I'm thinking I'm not going to show any intelligent restraint whatsoever over cocktails. None whatsoever. I think we're kind of getting up to about where we're supposed to get to, right? About there. Yeah. I'd like to thank the panel. It's been an outstanding conversation. Alison, congratulations on the book. It was heartfelt and memorable, and it's an outstanding audience. I'm really looking forward to network with folks here and have a little bit of wine. Thank you very much.